Ethan Caldwell was the kind of man people trusted without thinking twice. He didn't demand attention, didn't raise his voice, didn't leave any visible cracks for the world to question. In a quiet neighborhood just outside Austin, Texas, he was known as reliable. The man who helped fix a broken fence without being asked, who nodded politely when spoken to, who kept his life simple and predictable. To most people, that was enough to call him good. To his wife, Lillian, it was everything she had built her life around. Their home was modest but carefully kept, filled with the small routines that gave shape to their marriage. Mornings were quiet. Coffee brewed before sunrise, soft footsteps across the kitchen tile, the low hum of the news playing in the background. Evenings were slower. Dinner together. Occasional laughter. Long stretches of comfortable silence that, at one time, felt like peace. Lillian believed in that kind of peace. She wasn't drawn to chaos or intensity. She had spent her younger years watching relationships fall apart around her. Arguments that never ended, love that turned into something unrecognizable. When she met Ethan, what she saw was steadiness. A man who didn't overwhelm her. A man who stayed. But steadiness can sometimes hide distance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses and painted the kitchen in a dull orange glow, Lillian sat across from Ethan at the dinner table, watching him more closely than usual. He ate slowly, methodically, barely looking up. "You've been quiet lately," she said gently. Ethan shrugged without meeting her eyes. "Just tired." "You say that every day." "It's true every day." His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't warm either. It landed somewhere in between, flat, closed. Lillian pressed her lips together, choosing her next words carefully. "Is it work?" "The night shifts. That's what I get paid for." She waited, hoping he'd say more. He didn't. There was a time when he would have filled the silence. Told her something small, something meaningless but human, about a patient, a conversation, even a complaint. Now he seemed to move through his own life, like someone passing through a room he didn't belong in. "You don't talk to me anymore," she said quietly. That made him look up. For a moment, their eyes met, and something in his expression flickered. Not anger, not sadness, something harder to define. "Maybe there's nothing to talk about," he replied. The words were simple, but they settled heavily between them. Lillian felt it then, not as a sudden realization, but as a slow, sinking awareness that something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice, but enough to make her feel alone in a house that used to feel shared. Later that night, she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling while his back faced her. The distance between them wasn't physical. It was something quieter, more unsettling. Like reaching out and realizing there was nothing there to hold on to. "Ethan," she whispered into the dark. He didn't respond. "I miss you." A long pause followed. Then, barely audible, "I'm right here." But he wasn't. Not in the way he used to be. In the days that followed, the pattern continued. He left for work without much conversation. Came home without explanation. Moved through their shared space like a guest who had overstayed but didn't know how to leave. Lillian tried to ignore it at first. People get tired. People go through phases. That's what she told herself. But something about Ethan didn't feel temporary. It felt like the beginning of something she couldn't yet understand. And what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the version of Ethan she had built her life around was already starting to fracture. Not all at once. Not loudly. But quietly, in ways that would only become visible when it was too late to fix anything at all. Ethan didn't talk about his work unless someone asked, and even then, his answers were brief. It was easier that way. Caring for people in their final stages of life meant stepping into rooms filled with quiet endings. Families whispering in hallways, machines humming softly, bodies growing weaker by the day. He had learned early on that distance made the job bearable. 3 nights after that uneasy dinner with Lillian, his phone buzzed just after 9:30 p.m. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. "Ethan Caldwell," he answered. A woman's voice, efficient and direct. "We've got an urgent overnight assignment. Private client. High pay. Needs someone experienced immediately. You available?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, eyes drifting toward the hallway where Lillian was folding laundry. "What kind of case?" he asked. "Elderly. End-of-life care. Minimal mobility, but mentally alert. Family requested discretion." That wasn't unusual. Wealthier clients often preferred privacy, no agencies, no unnecessary documentation, no outside attention. How far? Ethan asked. About 40 minutes outside the city. Transportation's on you. Starts tonight. He should have said no. He had just come off a long shift. He hadn't slept properly in 2 days. And something inside him, something he couldn't quite name, felt off, like a quiet resistance pressing against the decision. But then the woman added, double your usual rate. Ethan exhaled slowly. I'll take it. When he hung up, Lillian appeared in the doorway, a basket of clothes in her arms. Another job? She asked. Just for the night. She studied him for a second. You said you were exhausted. I'll be fine. You always say that. He grabbed his keys from the counter. It's good money. Lillian shifted her weight, watching him more closely now. Ethan, you don't have to take every job. He didn't respond right away. He just nodded once, like the conversation was already over. I'll be back in the morning, he said. And then he left. The drive took him farther than he expected. Streetlights faded into long stretches of dark road, the city slowly dissolving behind him. By the time he reached the address, the air felt different, quieter, heavier. The property sat alone at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by tall hedges that blocked the view from the road. The house itself was large but dimly lit, its windows glowing faintly against the night. Ethan parked and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. Something about the place didn't feel like the others. He couldn't explain why. Finally, he stepped out of the car and approached the front door. It opened before he could knock. A middle-aged woman stood there, dressed sharply, her expression composed but distant. You're Ethan, she said. Yes, ma'am. She stepped aside without smiling. Come in. Inside, the house was immaculate, too clean, almost untouched. The kind of space that felt preserved rather than lived in. No television noise. No voices. Just silence. I'll keep this brief, the woman said as they walked down a long hallway. Her name is Margaret Harlow, 105. Physically fragile, but her mind is intact. She paused slightly on that last word. She doesn't like unnecessary conversation. She doesn't like being handled unless absolutely required. You're here to monitor, assist if needed, and stay present. Ethan nodded. Understood. The woman stopped at a closed door. She's awake, she said. She's been expecting you. That made him pause. Expecting me? The woman didn't answer directly. She just opened the door. Margaret Harlow lay in a large bed, her body thin beneath the covers, her skin pale and delicate. But her eyes were sharp, focused, almost unsettling in their clarity. They moved to Ethan immediately. So, she said, her voice soft but steady. You're the one. Ethan stepped inside slowly. I'll be assisting you tonight, ma'am. A faint smile touched her lips. Stay where I can see you, she said. Nights are long. The house manager closed the door behind him. And just like that, the silence deepened. At first, everything followed routine. Ethan checked her vitals, adjusted her pillows, ensured her medication schedule was followed. He kept his movements careful, professional, distant, the way he always did. But Margaret watched him, not casually, intently. As the hours passed, she began to speak. Not about her health, not about her family, about time, about the body, about things that didn't belong in a caregiver's shift. Do you think people change? She asked at one point, her eyes fixed on him. Or do they just become more of what they already are? Ethan hesitated. I'm not sure. She let out a soft breath that almost sounded like a laugh. You will be. The room felt smaller after that, more contained. Ethan checked the clock. Only 1:17 a.m. Hours left. Margaret shifted slightly, her gaze never leaving him. Come closer, she said. He stepped forward, keeping his expression neutral. Yes, ma'am. Her voice lowered, quieter now, but somehow more present. Tell me, she said. Do you believe the body forgets, or does it remember everything? Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. Because in that moment, something in the room changed. Not visibly, not in a way anyone could point to, but enough that, years later, when detectives tried to reconstruct what happened that night, they would all come back to the same question. Why didn't he leave? Because nothing in that house forced him to stay. And yet, he did. The clock on the far wall moved with a steady, indifferent rhythm, each second slipping past without meaning. Ethan noticed it only once, 1:42 a.m., before time seemed to lose its structure entirely. Margaret Harlow didn't sleep, not even for a moment. She lay still, her body fragile beneath the sheets, but her eyes remained open, fixed on him as if she were studying something beneath his skin. Ethan had worked dozens of overnight cases before. He knew restlessness. He knew confusion. He knew the slow drift of aging minds. This wasn't that. "You're uncomfortable," Margaret said quietly. Ethan shifted his weight slightly. "I'm fine." "No," she replied, her voice calm but certain. "You're trying to understand something you can't explain yet." He didn't answer. He kept his focus on the routine, checking her pulse, adjusting the blanket, keeping distance where he could. But the longer he stayed in that room, the harder it became to separate himself from her presence. "Sit," she said after a while. Ethan hesitated. "That's not necessary." "It is for me." Her tone wasn't demanding. It was steady, assured. He pulled a chair closer to the bed, careful to keep space between them. Margaret's eyes softened slightly, not with kindness, but with recognition. "People like you," she said. "They think control is the same as safety." Ethan frowned. "I'm just doing my job." "Are you?" The question lingered. He had no reason to feel unsettled. Everything about the situation was technically normal. A patient, a caregiver, a quiet night. And yet nothing felt normal. Margaret shifted her head slightly on the pillow, never breaking eye contact. "Do you ever feel like you're watching yourself?" she asked. "Like you're there, but not really there?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "No." She smiled faintly. "You will." The air in the room felt heavier now, pressing in on him in a way he couldn't name. He stood up, creating distance again, moving toward the window. Outside, there was nothing but darkness. No passing cars. No distant lights. Just stillness. He checked his phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual in rural areas, but it added to the sense that the world outside had quietly disappeared. Behind him, Margaret spoke again. "Why did you take this job?" He turned slightly. "It's work." "That's not what I asked." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Because I was available." "Because you said yes," she corrected. There was something in the way she said it that made it feel like more than a simple statement. Like a decision. Like a turning point. Margaret's voice softened further, almost a whisper. "Every choice matters," she said. "Even the ones that feel small." Ethan stepped back toward the bed, his movements slower now, more deliberate. "Do you need anything?" he asked. Margaret didn't respond right away. She simply looked at him, long enough that the silence itself became uncomfortable. Then, quietly, "Stay." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a command. It was something in between, something that made leaving feel like the wrong choice, even though nothing physically stopped him from doing so. Ethan remained where he was. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time had started to blur again. Margaret began speaking in fragments, memories, reflections, thoughts that drifted between clarity and abstraction. She spoke about youth as if it were something that never truly left, only changed shape. She spoke about the body as if it held on to everything it had ever known, no matter how much time passed. "People think age erases things," she murmured. "It doesn't. It reveals them." Ethan listened without meaning to. Each word seemed to pull him further into something he couldn't define. At some point, he realized he hadn't checked the clock again. Hadn't checked anything. The structure he relied on, routine, distance, professionalism, had quietly slipped away. Margaret shifted again, her hand moving slightly against the sheet. "Come closer," she said. Ethan didn't move immediately. He knew he should maintain distance. That was the rule. That was the boundary. But the room didn't feel like a place where rules applied anymore. He stepped forward. Not quickly, not decisively, but enough. Margaret's eyes followed him, steady and unblinking. "Tell me something," she said softly. "Do you feel different right now?" Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, he did. Not in a clear, logical way, but in something deeper. Something disorienting. Like standing on ground that had shifted without warning. Margaret's voice dropped even lower. "That's how it begins," she said. There were no raised voices. No sudden movements. Nothing that would later fit neatly into a report or timeline. What happened in that room unfolded in a way that resisted explanation. Quiet, gradual, impossible to define in a single moment. And that was what made it worse. Because when the night finally ended, when the first light of morning slipped through the window and broke whatever hold the darkness had created, Ethan didn't feel relief. He felt something else. Something hollow. Something wrong. When he stepped outside, the air was colder than he expected. The world looked the same. The driveway, the hedges, the empty road. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. The house manager met him at the door, clipboard in hand. "All set?" she asked. Ethan nodded, but his movements were slower now, less certain. "Are you okay?" she added, watching him more closely. He signed his name without looking at her. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice didn't match the words. As he walked back to his car, he paused for just a second, staring at his own reflection in the window. For a moment, he didn't recognize himself. Not clearly, not completely. And later, when detectives would sit across from him, asking the same question in different ways, hoping for something they could understand, this was the only thing Ethan ever said about that night. "I didn't leave as the same person." Morning arrived without clarity. Ethan drove home with both hands locked on the wheel, eyes fixed forward, as if looking away, even for a second, might force him to face something he wasn't ready to name. The road felt longer than it had the night before. Every mile stretched, heavy and slow, like time itself was resisting him. He didn't turn on the radio, didn't check his phone, didn't think in complete sentences. There was only a dull, persistent pressure inside his chest, something he couldn't organize into guilt or fear or even memory. Just a presence. Unsettling. Constant. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the sun had already climbed high enough to make everything look normal. Too normal. The house looked the same. The front porch, the trimmed lawn, the quiet street. Nothing reflected what had happened. Ethan sat in the car for a few seconds longer than necessary, staring at the front door as if it belonged to someone else. Then he stepped out. Inside, the smell of coffee lingered faintly in the air. Lillian stood in the kitchen, her back turned, folding a towel with slow, careful movements. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard the door. "You're back," she said. Ethan nodded. "How was it?" He didn't answer right away. He set his keys down on the counter, the sound sharper than it should have been. "Fine," he said. Lillian studied him for a moment longer than usual. "You look off." "I'm just tired." She turned fully now, leaning lightly against the counter. "You always say that, but this feels different." Ethan didn't respond. He walked past her, heading toward the hallway. "Ethan," she called after him. He stopped but didn't turn around. "What happened last night?" There it was again. The question. Simple, direct, impossible to answer. "Nothing," he said, but even he could hear the distance in his own voice. Lillian didn't push further, not yet. She watched him disappear into the bedroom, her expression tightening with something she couldn't fully define. Concern, maybe, or the beginning of something worse. Ethan didn't sleep. He lay on top of the covers, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as the hours passed without shape. Every time he closed his eyes, something flickered at the edge of his awareness. Not a clear image, not a memory he could replay, but a feeling. Like being watched. Like being pulled back into something he had already left. He sat up abruptly, pressing his hands against his face, trying to ground himself. "It was just a job," he muttered under his breath. The words didn't hold. From the doorway, Lillian's voice came softly. "You've been in here all day." Ethan lowered his hands slowly. "I'm fine." She stepped inside, cautious now, as if approaching something fragile. "No, you're not." He didn't look at her. "You didn't sleep. You didn't eat. You haven't said more than 2 words since you got back. It's just exhaustion. That's not what this is." Her voice was still gentle, but there was tension underneath it now. "Then what is it?" he asked, sharper than he intended. Lillian paused. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's why I'm asking you." Silence stretched between them. Ethan stood up, moving past her toward the bathroom. "I don't want to talk about it." "Why not?" He stopped at the door, gripping the frame slightly tighter than necessary. "Because there's nothing to say." "That's not true." Her voice followed him, more insistent now. "You don't shut down like this unless something happened." Ethan turned, finally meeting her eyes. For a brief moment, something surfaced, something raw, unsteady. "You wouldn't understand," he said. "Then try me." "I can't." The words came out quickly, almost reflexively. And just like that, the moment closed. Lillian stared at him, the distance between them widening in a way she could feel, but not fix. The days that followed settled into something colder. Ethan moved through the house without presence, eating when necessary, speaking only when spoken to, avoiding eye contact as if it required too much effort. He spent long stretches sitting alone, his gaze unfocused, his body still. At night, he didn't sleep. Lillian noticed everything. The way he flinched at small sounds. The way his breathing changed when the house grew quiet. The way he seemed to exist somewhere else entirely, even when he was standing right in front of her. She tried to reach him more than once. "Ethan, please," she said one evening, her voice breaking slightly. "Talk to me." He didn't answer. "I'm not your enemy." Still nothing. "I'm your wife." That made him react, but not in the way she expected. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders tightening. "Just leave it alone," he said. The words weren't loud, but they were final. Lillian stepped back, hurt flashing across her face before she could hide it. "Okay," she whispered. But it wasn't okay. Because whatever had followed Ethan home from that house wasn't fading. It was settling in. Quietly. Deeply. And neither of them understood yet how far it was going to go. The silence didn't fade. It hardened. By the third day, it had settled into something that felt permanent, like a wall neither of them knew how to tear down. Ethan moved through the house with the same distant rhythm, speaking only when necessary, avoiding anything that resembled a real conversation. Lillian watched it happen in real time, the man she knew slipping further out of reach with every passing hour. She stopped waiting for it to pass. That evening, just after sunset, she stood in the living room as Ethan walked in from the kitchen, a glass of water in his hand. The light outside had dimmed into that quiet gray that made everything feel more exposed. "Ethan," she said. He paused, but didn't respond. "We need to talk." He let out a slow breath, already tired of the conversation before it began. "Not now." "No," she said, firmer this time. "Now." He turned toward her, his expression tight. "I said not now. And I've been patient," she replied. "For 3 days." The words landed differently this time. There was no softness left in her tone, only urgency, and something close to fear. Ethan set the glass down harder than necessary. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." He laughed once, short and empty. "You think that's going to fix anything?" "I don't know," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "But pretending nothing happened definitely isn't." Silence stretched between them, heavy and unstable. Lillian took a step closer. "That job," she said. "The one you won't talk about. Something happened there." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Drop it." "No." The word came out stronger than she expected, but she didn't take it back. "I'm not dropping it," she continued. "You come home like this, like you're not even here, and you expect me to just ignore it?" "I said drop it," Ethan repeated, his voice lower now. "And I said no," she shot back. "I'm your wife, Ethan. I deserve to know what's going on." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a brief second, something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger. Not exactly. Something more unstable. "You don't want to know?" he said quietly. "Try me." "I mean it," he added. "You won't understand." "Then explain it so I can." He shook his head, almost to himself. "I can't." The words were immediate, automatic. And that was what broke something in her. Lillian's expression shifted, the hurt finally pushing past restraint. "Can't or won't." Ethan didn't answer. She let out a breath that trembled at the edges. "You won't even try," she said. "Do you hear yourself? You're shutting me out like I don't matter." "That's not what I'm doing." "Then what are you doing?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because he didn't have an answer that made sense. Not one he could say out loud. Lillian shook her head, her frustration rising. "You don't talk. You don't sleep. You won't even look at me half the time. And you expect me to believe this is nothing." "It's not something you can fix," he said, sharper now. "I'm not trying to fix it," she replied. "I'm trying to understand it." "You can't." The certainty in his voice hit harder than anything else. Lillian stared at him, disbelief settling in. "Why?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. Just for a moment. But it was enough. "Because I don't even understand it," he said. The admission hung in the air, raw and unsteady. Lillian softened slightly, taking a careful step forward. "Then let me help you figure it out," she said. "We don't have to do this alone." Ethan looked away immediately. "You don't get it." "Then make me get it." "I can't," he snapped. The volume surprised both of them. Silence followed, thicker than before. Lillian's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Did you do something?" she asked. Ethan's entire body stilled. "What?" "At that house," she continued, her eyes searching his face. "Did something happen with that woman?" He didn't answer, didn't move, didn't even breathe. And in that stillness, Lillian found her answer. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" "I told you. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," she said again. But this time there was something broken in her voice. Ethan ran a hand over his face, pacing once, then stopping. It wasn't, he started, then stopped. The words refused to form. Because there was no version of the truth that sounded real. Lillian's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Were you unfaithful to me? She asked, her voice steady despite everything. Ethan's silence stretched too long. That's not even the point, he said finally. Her expression collapsed. Then what is the point, Ethan? She demanded. Because from where I'm standing, I don't recognize you anymore. He looked at her again, and this time there was no flicker, only something hollow. I don't recognize myself either, he said. The room felt smaller, closer, like the walls were inching inward. Lillian took a step back, shaking her head slowly. This isn't normal, she said. This isn't you. Ethan didn't respond, because somewhere deep down, he knew she was right. And that was the part he couldn't face. The distance between them wasn't just emotional anymore. It was something else, something unstable. And as the silence returned, heavier, sharper, more dangerous than before, neither of them realized that this wasn't just a breaking point. It was the beginning of something that couldn't be stopped. The house didn't settle after the argument. It held the tension. Every word that had been said, every pause, every look, seemed to linger in the air, pressing down on both of them long after the conversation ended. Lillian stood in the living room, arms wrapped around herself, trying to steady her breathing. Ethan had moved into the kitchen, but the distance between rooms didn't create distance between them. If anything, it made everything sharper, more exposed, more dangerous. Minutes passed in silence that wasn't quiet. Lillian finally moved first. She stepped into the kitchen doorway, her voice controlled but strained. This isn't over. Ethan didn't turn around. It needs to be. No, she said. It doesn't. He set his hands against the counter, shoulders tense. You keep pushing this. It's not going to end the way you think. She let out a small, incredulous breath. What does that even mean? It means stop, he said, his voice low. And I told you I'm not stopping. The finality in her tone cut through whatever restraint he had left. Ethan turned sharply, facing her. You don't understand what you're asking for. Then explain it, she shot back. Because right now, all I see is a man who won't even tell his wife the truth. His eyes flickered, frustration, confusion, something deeper and more unstable rising beneath the surface. There is no version of this that makes sense, he said. Then try anyway. I can't. His voice broke through the room, louder than anything he had said before. Lillian froze for a second, startled, but she didn't step back this time. You don't get to shut me out like this, she said, her voice shaking but firm. You don't get to come home from something like that and act like I'm the problem. I never said you were the problem. Then what is, she demanded. Because you're acting like I did something to you. I didn't say that. You don't have to, she snapped. It's written all over you. Ethan's breathing had changed now, shorter, uneven, like he was trying to hold something down and failing. Just stop talking, he said. No. The word landed harder this time. Lillian stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. I'm not going to stand here and pretend everything's fine when it's not, she said. I deserve answers. You deserve peace, he shot back. And this isn't going to give it to you. That's not your decision to make. His jaw tightened. You don't know what you're dealing with. Then tell me. I told you. You wouldn't understand. Then make me understand. Her voice rose, cracking under the weight of everything she had been holding in. Because right now, all I see is my husband disappearing right in front of me. The words hit something deep. Too deep. For a brief second, Ethan's expression shifted, like something inside him snapped into place and then immediately broke apart again. You keep saying that, he said, quieter now, but more intense. Like I have control over it. What does that mean? She asked, her voice faltering. Ethan shook his head, backing away slightly. It means something changed, he said. And I don't know how to undo it. Lillian's face softened for a moment, confusion overtaking anger. Then we figure it out, she said. Together. He let out a hollow laugh. You still think this is something we can fix? Yes, she said. I do. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, there was something close to fear in his eyes. No, he said. You don't. The room went still. Lillian felt it then, not just distance, not just confusion. Something else. Something wrong. She took another step forward, slower this time. Ethan, she said softly, You're scaring me. He didn't respond. His gaze had drifted slightly, unfocused, like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. Ethan, nothing. She reached out, her hand brushing against his arm. That was the moment everything shifted. Ethan reacted instantly, jerking back as if her touch had burned him. Don't, he said sharply. Lillian pulled her hand back, stunned. What is wrong with you? He didn't answer. His breathing grew heavier, his chest rising and falling too quickly. I didn't mean to, she started. Just stop, he cut in. I'm trying to help you. You can't, he snapped. The volume, the intensity, it was too much now. Lillian shook her head, tears finally breaking through. Then what am I supposed to do? She asked. Just stand here and watch you fall apart? Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. I told you to leave it alone. And I told you I can't. The words collided, louder, sharper. And then, something broke. It wasn't a single moment anyone could point to later. Not one clear action, not one decisive move. Just a rapid shift, too fast to process, too sudden to stop. A step forward, a reaction, a struggle of space, of motion, of something spiraling out of control. Lillian's voice, once clear, strong, fractured into something desperate. Ethan, wait. But the moment didn't wait. It collapsed. And when it was over, the house went quiet again. Not the same silence as before. This one was absolute. Ethan stood still, his breathing heavy, his hands shaking slightly at his sides. The tension that had filled the room was gone, replaced by something colder. Final. Lillian didn't move. The realization came slowly, like something rising through water. Ethan looked down at his hands, then at her, then back again, as if trying to connect the two. He started, but the word didn't go anywhere. There was nothing to explain, nothing to fix. The man who had spent days insisting he didn't understand what had changed now stood in the middle of something he couldn't take back. The house, once filled with quiet routines and familiar patterns, had become something else entirely. And in that stillness, Ethan didn't run, didn't shout, didn't call for help. He just stood there, as if whatever had been holding him together before had finally given way and left nothing behind to take its place. The house stayed silent long after everything had already ended. Ethan didn't move at first. He stood in the middle of the room, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths, staring at what he had done without fully understanding how it had happened. The tension that had consumed the space just moments before had disappeared completely, replaced by something hollow, something final. Time passed. Minutes, maybe longer. There was no clear marker. The clock on the wall kept ticking, steady and indifferent, but Ethan didn't look at it. He didn't look at anything with intention. His eyes drifted, unfocused, as if he were still trying to catch up to a moment that had already moved past him. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. He didn't react. The world beyond the house had started moving again, but inside, everything remained frozen. It wasn't Ethan who called. It was a neighbor. Later, they would say they heard raised voices, sharp, urgent, different from anything they had ever heard from the Caldwell home before. Then, suddenly, nothing. No movement. No sound. Just silence. Enough to make someone pick up the phone. The patrol car arrived within minutes. 2 officers stepped out, their movements calm but alert, the kind of quiet readiness that comes from experience. They approached the house, noticing immediately that the front door wasn't fully closed. One officer exchanged a glance with the other. That's not right, he said under his breath. They knocked once. No response. Then again, louder. Still nothing. The door pushed open with almost no resistance. Police, one of them called out. Anyone inside? The words echoed slightly in the stillness. They stepped in. The air inside felt different. Heavy, unmoving, like the house itself was holding its breath. They moved slowly, scanning the space, their training taking over as instinct sharpened. Clear the left, one officer said quietly. Got it. They advanced further inside. And then they saw him. Ethan sat on the floor near the living room, his back against the wall, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He wasn't trying to leave, wasn't trying to hide. He looked up as they entered, but his expression didn't change. No panic, no confusion, just emptiness. Sir, one officer said carefully, approaching him. Can you hear me? Ethan blinked once, slowly. Yes. The officer glanced briefly past him, and that was when everything shifted. Stay with him, the second officer said sharply, already moving forward. The first officer's posture changed immediately, alert, focused. "Sir, I need you to stay where you are." Ethan didn't move, didn't resist, didn't even seem to fully process the command. "What happened here?" the officer asked. Ethan's eyes drifted for a moment, then settled again. "I didn't mean to," he said. The words were quiet, almost detached. The officer crouched slightly, keeping his distance. "I need you to stand up for me, okay?" Ethan hesitated. Then slowly he did. Every movement was controlled, but not intentional, like his body was responding out of habit rather than thought. "Turn around." He complied. The click of handcuffs echoed sharply in the room. Ethan didn't react to the sound, didn't pull away, didn't ask questions. As the officer guided him toward the door, he glanced once, just once, back over his shoulder. Not long enough to linger, not long enough to fully take it in, but enough. Outside, the morning air had shifted. Neighbors stood at a distance, watching quietly, their faces filled with a mix of confusion and disbelief. The flashing lights of the patrol car cut through the stillness, bright and jarring against the otherwise calm street. Ethan stepped onto the front porch as if he had done it 1,000 times before. Routine. Unremarkable. Except nothing about this was routine. One of the officers opened the back door of the patrol car. "Watch your head," he said. Ethan lowered himself inside without resistance. The door closed. And just like that, the moment moved from private to public. Inside the house, more officers arrived. The scene was secured. Radios crackled. Voices became sharper, more procedural. But outside, everything remained quiet. Ethan sat in the back of the car, staring straight ahead. He didn't ask for a lawyer. Didn't ask what would happen next. Didn't say anything at all. Because whatever had happened inside that house, whatever had changed in him, had already taken everything that mattered. And there was nothing left for him to hold on to. By the time the sun fully rose, the Caldwell house had already been transformed from a home into a scene. Yellow tape stretched across the front yard. Patrol cars lined the street. Neighbors who had once waved politely now stood at a distance, speaking in hushed voices, trying to make sense of something that didn't fit the version of Ethan Caldwell they thought they knew. Inside, the rhythm shifted from shock to procedure. Photographs, measurements, notes taken in careful, practiced handwriting. Every object, every position, every detail documented with precision. But even in those first hours, something about the case felt different. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of planning, no attempt to flee, only a single, devastating outcome, and a man who hadn't tried to escape it. At the station, Ethan sat in a small interview room, his hands resting on the metal table, the same stillness following him from the house. The fluorescent light above him hummed faintly, casting a harsh clarity over everything. Detective Laura Bennett had seen hundreds of suspects. Anger, denial, panic, manipulation. Ethan showed none of it. He didn't look like a man trying to defend himself. He looked like someone who had already accepted something he couldn't change. She took a seat across from him, setting a folder down without opening it. "Ethan," she said calmly, "I need you to walk me through what happened." He didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the table, as if the answer might be written there. "I don't know," he said finally. Detective Bennett didn't react to the words. She leaned forward slightly. "You don't know how it started?" she clarified. "Or you don't know why it happened?" Ethan blinked once, slowly. "Both." Silence followed. She studied him carefully. "No history of violence," she said. "No prior incidents. No reports. Nothing that suggests this kind of outcome." Ethan's expression didn't change. "So something did happen," she continued. "Something changed." At that, his fingers tightened slightly against the table. Bennett noticed. "What was it?" she asked. Ethan exhaled slowly, like the question itself carried weight. "There was a job," he said. "That was where the investigation shifted. Margaret Harlow." The name didn't mean much at first, just another private client, another address, another overnight assignment. But as detectives began to trace the details, the circumstances surrounding that night stood out immediately. Remote location, limited documentation, minimal staff interaction, and a caregiver who left the property visibly altered. When Detective Bennett and her partner arrived at the estate, the same quiet stillness lingered, untouched by what had unfolded days earlier. The house manager greeted them at the door. "You're here about Ethan," she said, her tone measured. "We are," Bennett replied. "We need to understand what happened during that shift." The woman hesitated for a fraction of a second. He completed his duties, she said. There were no complaints. That's not what we're asking, Bennett said. We're asking about his condition when he left. The manager's expression tightened slightly. He seemed off, she admitted. Distracted, not like someone finishing a normal shift. Did anything unusual happen inside that room? No, she said quickly. Nothing I witnessed. Bennett held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Can we speak with Miss Harlow? Margaret Harlow looked exactly as described. Fragile. Still. Unchanged. Except for her eyes. They moved to Detective Bennett the moment she entered the room, sharp and aware in a way that felt almost out of place. You've come about the man, Margaret said softly. Yes, Bennett replied. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Margaret smiled faintly. He was interesting. Bennett didn't return the smile. What happened that night? Margaret's gaze drifted slightly, as if considering the question from a distance. Nothing that hasn't happened before, she said. That doesn't help me, Bennett replied. Margaret looked back at her. People come in thinking they know themselves, she said. Sometimes they leave, knowing they don't. The answer settled into the room without clarity. Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior? Bennett pressed. Margaret's smile returned, quieter this time. He listened, she said. More than most. That's it. For some people, Margaret added. That's enough. Back at the station, the pieces didn't align cleanly. No clear motive. No financial trigger. No external pressure. Just a man with no history of violence, who returned from a single overnight shift and unraveled within days. Detective Bennett sat across from Ethan again, the file now thicker, but no more complete. We spoke to Margaret Harlow, she said. Ethan's eyes lifted slightly. And he asked. She said you listened. Ethan let out a faint, almost hollow breath. Yeah, he said. Bennett leaned forward. What did you hear? Ethan's gaze dropped again. I don't know how to explain it. Try. A long pause. Then, quietly. It felt like something shifted, he said. Like I wasn't separate anymore. Bennett frowned slightly. Separate from what? Ethan didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was lower. From myself. The room went still. Because that wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a justification. It was something else entirely. And as the investigation continued, one truth became harder to ignore. This case wasn't just about what Ethan did. It was about what happened to him, and why no one could fully explain it. The courtroom filled before the doors officially opened. Word had spread quickly about the quiet husband, the sudden violence, the unanswered question that seemed to sit at the center of everything. People didn't come just to hear what happened. They came to understand it. But understanding was the one thing this case refused to give. Ethan Caldwell entered without resistance, escorted in by 2 deputies, his posture straight but detached. He wore a plain suit provided by his attorney, his hands resting calmly in front of him, as if he were stepping into a place that had already decided something about him. He didn't look toward the gallery, didn't search for familiar faces. There weren't many. Lillian's family sat together on the right side of the room, their grief visible, contained, but undeniable. They didn't look at Ethan either, not out of indifference, but because looking at him meant confronting something they couldn't accept. The trial began with facts. Clean, structured, measured. The prosecution built their case carefully, step by step, laying out the timeline in a way that removed any ambiguity from the outcome. On the morning of March 14th, the prosecutor said, his voice steady. Officers responded to a domestic disturbance call. They arrived to find the defendant at the scene. He did not flee. He did not deny involvement. And he admitted, in his own words, I didn't mean to. The words echoed slightly in the quiet room. The prosecutor paused, letting them settle. This is not a case of uncertainty, he continued. This is a case of action. A choice was made, and that choice ended a life. There was no anger in his tone, just clarity. Because from the prosecution's perspective, motive didn't need to be complex. The outcome spoke for itself. The defense approached it differently. They didn't argue that Ethan hadn't done it. They argued that something had happened to him, something that didn't fit within a simple explanation of intent. This is not about denying responsibility, the defense attorney said during opening statements. It is about understanding the state of mind that led to this moment. He turned slightly, gesturing toward Ethan. My client had no history of violence, no prior incidents, no indication, none, that he was capable of this kind of act. And yet, Within 72 hours of a single overnight assignment, everything changed. The courtroom listened, not because the argument was dramatic, but because it introduced the one thing everyone had been circling. Why? Detective Laura Bennett took the stand first. She described the scene, the arrest, the interviews. He was cooperative, she said. He didn't attempt to leave. He didn't resist. Did he offer an explanation? The prosecutor asked. No, she replied. Not one that was clear. The defense attorney stepped forward. Did he appear confused? Bennett paused. Yes. Disoriented. Yes. Like someone who fully understood what had happened. Another pause. No. The answer lingered. Then came Margaret Harlow's name. The defense introduced the assignment as a critical point, not as justification, but as context. A shift. A trigger. Something that couldn't be ignored. But when they attempted to define it, it slipped away. The house manager testified briefly. He seemed different when he left, she said. Distracted. Different how? The defense asked. She hesitated, like something had unsettled him. Margaret herself did not appear in court. Her statement was read instead. People believe they know themselves, it said, until they don't. The jury listened. But statements like that didn't translate into legal reasoning. They raised questions. They didn't answer them. When Ethan took the stand, the room grew noticeably still. He looked the same as he had throughout the trial. Calm, composed, distant. But when he spoke, there was something else beneath it. Something strained. Did you love your wife? The prosecutor asked. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Then help us understand why you killed her. Ethan's gaze dropped briefly, then lifted again. I don't know how to explain it, he said. That's not what I asked, the prosecutor replied. I asked why. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Because something changed, he said. What changed? A pause. I did. The prosecutor stepped closer. People don't just change overnight, he said. Not like that. Ethan didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. It didn't feel like overnight, he said. It felt like something shifted, and I couldn't get back. The courtroom held its breath. The prosecutor studied him for a moment, then asked the question everyone had been waiting for. Are you saying you had no control? Ethan shook his head slowly. No, he said. I'm saying I didn't understand what was happening to me. The defense followed. Do you remember the moment it happened? They asked. Ethan hesitated. Not clearly. Do you remember deciding to do it? Another pause. No. Do you regret it? That question landed differently. Ethan's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Yes, he said. Every second. In the end, the trial didn't resolve the mystery. It clarified the outcome. The jury wasn't asked to understand Ethan. They were asked to decide what to do with what he had done. And that decision didn't require answers. Only certainty. Because no matter how complex the questions became, one fact remained unchanged. Lillian Caldwell was gone, and nothing that happened in that courtroom could bring her back. The verdict came without hesitation. Guilty. The word landed with a finality that no argument, no testimony, no unanswered question could soften. It moved through the courtroom like a quiet wave, expected, inevitable, and still heavy enough to settle into every corner of the room. Ethan didn't react. He stood as the decision was read, his posture unchanged, his expression still caught somewhere between presence and absence. If there was relief, it didn't show. If there was fear, it stayed buried beneath something deeper. Acceptance, maybe, or emptiness. Across the room, Lillian's family held on to each other, the weight of the moment pressing into something that wasn't closure, but the closest thing they would ever get to it. There was no resolution waiting on the other side of the verdict. No explanation that would make the loss feel smaller. Just an ending that had already happened days before. Sentencing followed weeks later. The courtroom was quieter this time. Less crowded. Less curiosity. Only those who needed to be there remained. The judge spoke with measured clarity, outlining the facts once more, not to explain, but to affirm. This court has considered the nature of the crime, the absence of prior violence, and the circumstances presented, he said. However, the outcome remains unchanged. A life was taken, and for that, there must be accountability. Ethan listened without interruption. When the sentence was delivered, he nodded once. Not in agreement. Not in defiance. Just acknowledgement. The kind that comes when there is nothing left to argue. Prison reduced everything to routine. Time became structured again. Wake, count, meals, silence. The same pattern repeated day after day, stripping away anything that didn't serve a purpose. For most people, it was suffocating. For Ethan, it was almost fitting. The chaos that had taken over his life was gone, replaced by something predictable, contained. But the quiet didn't bring peace. It only made space. Space for memory. Space for questions. Space for the one moment that refused to stay in the past. At night, when the facility settled into its own version of silence, Ethan would sit on the edge of his bed, staring at nothing, the same way he had in his own home just days before everything collapsed. Only now, there was no one left to ask him what was wrong. No one left to reach for him. No one left to lose. The Caldwell house didn't stay empty for long. It was sold within months. Repainted, cleaned, reset. From the outside, it looked like any other home again. Quiet, ordinary, untouched by what had happened inside. New owners moved in, unaware of the weight that had once filled those rooms. Neighbors stopped talking about it, not because they forgot, but because there was nothing left to say. The story didn't offer comfort. It didn't offer a clear warning. It didn't even offer a reason that made sense. And without those things, it became something people chose not to hold on to. Detective Laura Bennett closed the file months later. The paperwork was complete. The case was resolved. Everything that could be documented had been. But as she placed it into storage, she paused for a moment longer than necessary. Because resolution, in cases like this, didn't always mean understanding. She had seen violence before. Motives that were clear. Patterns that made sense once you followed them far enough. This wasn't one of those cases. There was no single moment she could point to and say, that's why. Only a sequence of events that led from something unexplainable to something irreversible. And somewhere, far removed from the courtroom, from the reports, from the structured language of law and procedure, one truth remained untouched by all of it. Ethan Caldwell had been a man people trusted, a husband who built his life on quiet routines and steady presence, until one night shifted something inside him, and nothing that followed could put it back. The silence that came after wasn't peaceful. It wasn't empty. It was filled with everything that had no answer. And that was what remained.